Hello and welcome to another episode of the High Achieving Female Podcast. It's Sarah Benkenfishi, your host, and today I'm excited to introduce you to PR Queen, Magic Nicole Peternel. She is a Charlotte-based founder of not one, but two PR agencies, Rain Communications and Little Bit Publicity. I cannot wait for you to dig into this episode. She's sharing lots of tips, tricks, and a little bit about her backstory. Enjoy. Welcome to the High Achieving Female Podcast, powered by Know, where we believe high achieving female leaders deserve to be known. Here, you're going to get the tips, tools, and inspiration you need to network, grow, scale, and balance your business, career, and life. Nicole, I am so excited that you're here today. I cannot wait to talk about your backstory. As I mentioned, everyone, this is the PR queen that you need to know. So Nicole, welcome. And thank you again for saying yes to this.
Oh, of course. Thank you, Sarah. I always love chatting with you and sharing kind of my story.
So what you all don't know is that Nicole is actually a personal friend of mine. We're well connected. And so it's really fun when I get to interview people I know really, really well. But we're going to kick things off with like a little bit about the backstory. We'll go into all of the things that you're doing, how and why I name you the PR queen in a few minutes. But let's go back to like Nicole. Who is Nicole? Give me like the skinny, give them the skinny.
Well, that's changing all the time, right? We're constantly reinventing ourselves. So I think who I am at the core is a person that really, as just kind of the human side of me, really cares a lot about helping other people, connecting other people. When I see an opportunity for someone, they don't have to be a client. They don't even have to be a friend. I'm like, hey, I feel like this would be a really good fit for you. So I am that person. I'm also the mom of two young, crazy boys, and been married to my husband for I think, gosh, I always forget, like 12 years. I know the man's the one that's supposed to forget. It's me always. And I've got 3 dogs. So it's never a dull moment at our house. And then, I own 2 public relations agencies that are women, obviously owned, ran and directed.
I love that. Okay. And you're based out of Charlotte, not originally from Charlotte. And you are like, you're the connector. You are the woman who's like running around doing all the things. This just makes me shout out how great of an industry this is for you. How did you and why did you decide to go into public relations, communications, media, all of that? Where did you get the start from? Where did you get the idea from?
So I was always like in high school, a really good writer, but my mom was like, you should go into college and study, writing. And I'm like, well, what am I going to be, an English teacher? That wasn't something that I was too social for that. So I actually went to college when all my friends were graduating because I put myself through school. It wasn't really a conversation in my house. So waited tables for years and did all of that stuff to save up money and went to school. And when I started, I really thought I would go into marketing because I love the strategy side of communications as well. I actually took an intro to PR as one of my electives. And literally in that class, I was like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So from there, I transferred to a journalism school at the University of Minnesota and got my start and, got my first internship from that while also working full time and going to school, but was really just fortunate to have some connections and opportunities that enabled me to get really great internships and then really start my path down public relations.
And that's what I was going to say. So you had some pretty incredible jobs, like even early in your career, starting in the Twin Cities. You had mentioned that you did like PR for all the Broadway shows that were on tour. You worked for the NFL. I mean, talk a little bit about like working in those industries and what you think what did you learn from them that really have helped you become who you are today and your agencies?
Yeah. So actually that first internship I had that turned into a full-time job doing PR for Broadway was super impactful for me. I had a woman that hired me and she actually told me, afterwards, she said, you were my wild card. And I said, wild card. And she's like, you were the only one that didn't really have PR experience. You didn't have internship experience, but I wanted to take a chance on you and just bring you in after our phone conversation. And, she gave me that opportunity when, no one else maybe would have, right? So, and I just had applied, blindly online. From there, I really talked to a lot of my journalism professors and things like that, kind of helped cultivate my career in that way. And then moving to the NFL was actually through the man I was dating at the time, he had played D1 sports at Yale and had introduced me to one of the original owners at the Vikings. And that really set my path down that trajectory. I spent a couple seasons working there for the Vikings. It was a lot of, media relations, game day things, but then some like crisis relations and things like that. I know women are more prominent now a bit in sports, but
Oh, yeah.
but to give you an idea, like when I started, on my team, I was the only woman, and PR typically is a very female dominated industry. So
Right.
the men, even on my team, were like, what do you know about football? You've never played, right? And a lot of them, that was their only experience playing football and then taking journalism while they were in college. So it was definitely a bit of an uphill battle. It still is, a very much a boys' club. But even back then, especially, how 20 years ago, it was a really interesting environment to be in.
I can only imagine I mean, you're not bad to look at, ma'am. So like, you're like the cute PR girl. I'm just imagining like what it would have been like to be in the room, like just thinking like, oh, she's so cute. Oh, and you're like, no, take me seriously. I know my stuff. I can just only imagine you working in like such a male dominated industry, which is still very much, ego driven and roar man. Right. And so like,
Yeah.
I can only imagine the stories that you have from those days and how it allowed you to get and build this tough, thick skin that you have. But what I want to talk about is like crisis communications. How do you like, is that your jam? Do you love that? Like, I feel like some people are just really, really great at it, and other publicists like want to stray away from that. But talk a little bit about crisis communications, your experience in that.
Yeah. So I actually, and probably speaks to the unstable household I grew up in, but I actually thrive really well in a crisis. I've obviously worked with ones that are a little bit more, we always call them like simmering crisis, where we're like, okay, we need to put an end to that. And then things that just arise, right? We had a large shopping mall here that kept having shootings, right? And so who would they call? All of a sudden something happens. I would be at my kids' hockey game and I learned to keep like an extra change of clothes and makeup in my car, excuse me. So I could at any time go and kind of these crises. I'll say this, I don't mind doing crisis relations. What I do mind is when companies just want to sweep things under the rug and aren't looking at like the foundation of change and why they need to implement certain things to prevent these crises from happening. So oftentimes, and I'll say this, we had a client that was a large hospital system, and they had within the matter of a couple of weeks, like, a shooting in the ER and someone commits suicide and all of these, an abduction from there. And they're like, okay, well, we need crisis now. And I'm like, well, we do. First of all, I can't just like swipe it under the rug and say, oh, look over here, but they're doing a charity event. That doesn't work that way. Right. So
Right.
I do like doing crisis, but what I like even more is doing the planning with companies, because I always say it's not a matter of if, it's when. Something will happen to your company and you need to be prepared.
I think that's so important. And we talked a little bit about like the strategic communications and the strategy behind it, which I think is also very, very, very valuable. So let's actually break down PR for those who are listening to the podcast. Let's talk a little bit about PR as an industry. Some people get confused with the marketing side of it, the communication side of it, just being on the news or that sort of thing. So let's go back to the basics. What is your best definition for PR and media relations?
So you asked a great question, and I can tell you that there are people in our industry that say they do PR, and I'm like, no, you do publicity. They're different things, right? And so, for example, our second agency that we launched a little bit is publicity focused. It's deliverables focused. It's local markets. It's very specific in who they're trying to reach, and knowing that they just need to, be in front of some people to drive business. Public relations is much more strategic. Publicity is a piece of public relations, right? But the focus there on PR when done, or strategic communications, we'll say, it's two things. It is that visibility, and clearly you can get visibility through, your social media. You can get visibility through traditional forms of publicity, but it's also that credibility piece, right? It's not just saying, hey, here we are, we're the best thing ever, but it's like, how are we credible? How do you build brand trust or individual trust in what it is that you're doing? And so that is a big piece of it that I would say is part of PR and not always part of publicity. But what also, when you do, then if you take it a step further and say it's strategic public relations, which is when I moved here, I didn't see a lot of strategic PR firms, and coming from, the top global agencies, this is something that they do really well. And so when I opened Rain and decided to go from just doing media training and diving back into PR, it was really important for me to identify, and we do this with our clients, the steps in order to create a public relations plan and the strategy, because that's what creates ROI. So I'm happy to
100%.
share those 5 things with you if you'd like, really quickly. But it's really, figuring out what your goals are, right? And the objectives to reach your goals. Goal is usually, I don't care if you're a for-profit or nonprofit, there's money that has to be made to support what it is you're trying to do. The objectives are those things that are going to support your goals. And of course, we bring ethos and all of that stuff in, but that goes more in the messaging, right? So that's your objectives. Once we figure out those objectives, we say, okay, per each objective, right? Let's say we're chewing off 3. Who are the audiences for each one? And typically we say, okay, how do we segment these audiences? Because I can tell you that one of the biggest mistakes companies make, well, there's a lot, but is either trying to speak to everyone the same way or not really figuring out who their audiences are, because then that trickles down into the next 2 steps. And that's crucial, because then it's, how do I reach those audiences? How do I meet them where they're at? And then what messaging is relevant with them? It is not about what you want to say. It is not about what you think looks cute. It is putting yourself in their shoes, either the primary or secondary audience, which that's a whole nother podcast, but and really figuring out what's going to resonate with them. That is what's going to drive action, which is what is going to drive your goals and objectives, and then kind of, reaching success. So that is something that we do and we take the time to do with our clients, rather than just, someone calling and saying, hey, do you guys do media relations? We do, that's part of it, but let's talk about all of those things I just laid out first and decide the best path to take instead of just jumping into action.
Wow. Yes. 100%. Because, and really to summarize this up, right? Like I could land a gig on the news, but if I don't know what I'm doing with it, who I'm speaking to, how it reflects back to my company, how to leverage it, all of that, then it just it's a huge missed opportunity and it falls flat. So I think that the strategy behind it is so, so incredible. And that's what I love about what you do. And, coming from Chicago, so like you had said, you started in the Twin Cities and you ultimately went to Chicago and now you're down in Charlotte. But being in Chicago, you were able to really learn from a lot of big agencies and see what they were doing, and then really to pack it into your agency, which is based in Charlotte, but you have national clients all over, which is incredible. But the thing that I love about Nicole and what Nicole is doing is that you have this offer or this ability to work with so many. And my favorite part of what you do, and I love everything that you're doing, is little bit. It's little bit, because little bit is so important for the little guy. And I don't want to say the little guy to demean anyone at all, but because it's so important for the women. In my mind, they're women. Everybody is a woman in my mind.
Men, but it's a lot of women.
I mean, I don't know them. I know women. Right. But it's so important for the women out here to get a little bit while they're in this growth interim stage, and then ultimately help them with the strategy as well when they can, right? Because we know that PR is important. Publicity is important. The strategy behind how you build and ultimately grow and scale your business is so important. And when you approach it in this fashion in which you literally just gave us the whole the framework for, it creates success. So let's talk a little bit about Rain, and let's talk a little bit about Little Bit and how you're serving so many people with these 2 agencies.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And I love that's just first of all, thank you for the kind words, but I can tell you Little Bit was really a passion project of mine, born out of, and Listen, I had to sit down with it for a long time because I am a strategist. I am our lead strategist. I like sitting down with kind of that direction and figuring out where we're going to go because I like things to make sense, right? However, what I would find a lot of times is there would be smaller businesses where, and I'll just say the correlation, Rain Communications is like holding the reins, which is our corporate clients. We're working right now with a large international human trafficking nonprofit. Some of those larger organizations that we work with on the Rain side that we really need to dig into. On the other side, when you're a smaller business, like especially if you're just appealing to a local market or you have a very niche audience, let's say it's B2B and it's a trade organization or something like that, you really just need people to know that you're there, right? And you can still build some of that credibility, but to know that you're there and to know what you do, right? Where to find you. And so I really had to I'm going to sit down and separate myself. And I still struggle with it sometimes today to be like, all right, we're going to look at these deliverables because I know they're effective, right? And I, after doing this for 25 years, can sit and say, okay, here's what I think you need to get started, right? But it's very much looking at those basic things. So, but what's the strategy then? As you said, it still applies. What's the strategy behind your social? We don't want to just add noise, right? We want to make sure that we're creating things of value for our audience. Who is your audience? It is media relations. We're not necessarily getting those clients, we're not spending the time it takes to work our connections at the New York Times and Forbes and things like that, but they don't need that. They need people locally to know what it is that they do, right? So that's really what we do. And we are very, we do awards and applications and then speaking engagements. So it's very much more defined in how we proceed with that, but it's also a lot smaller budget. And what we always tell clients, and this is on either side, Rain or Little Bit, is to really start with your own. What do you have control over, right? That's your website, that's your social, that's if you're doing email, that sort of thing. And let's examine that, right? What are you saying? Are you targeting the right people? And then you want to move into, as you had an example prior, but into earned, because if you can always have a flash in the pan. Great, I had a media interview and that went great, but unless you're building the foundation on the owned, those earned aren't going to be as regular, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're building your credibility. People, when I pitch media, I know what they're going to do is go look at your social media. If they don't know who you are and what you stand for, it's much harder for us to kind of get placements for you. Earned is also awards, it's speaking engagements, so it's all of those things. And then what we always say is our goal is to get you to expert, owned, earned, expert. And then experts when you've done this media, you're consistent in all of the other things we're doing with you. And our phone is ringing because they're like, hey, we need someone to weigh in on, this thing that's happening in the news cycle. We work with, all the time I'm texting back and forth with anchors, producers, and we're talking about story angles and things like that. And we help them out with people that aren't even our clients. I'm like, I can find someone for you. So anyhow, we want to move them through those pieces. And then, the hope is you get to expert, your company's exploding. And then we talk to you about more strategic communications on the Rain side. So it is nice. We're growing in other cities for Little Bit. So that's exciting. And we're excited just to be able to serve that. I know how effective PR is. I mean, the stats, the data, everything, but even just from my own personal experience, not to poo-poo advertising, but you're telling a story. So how are you doing that in a way that increases your ROI and builds your business?
I 100% agree with you on this because, a big part of and women listening to this podcast are really searching for the credibility so that they can be the expert, especially as we reach points in our careers where we've done a lot of work. Now we're ready to step into leadership. We want to step into more speaking or being published and those sort of things, and how important the credibility component is. So what would you say to someone who is looking to get started, maybe going down this route? What is the best ROI for them? And I know this is sort of a loaded question because I'm not giving you industry or scenario information, but where do you suggest that a woman-owned business who's hyper-local gets started?
Yeah, and honestly, it's a formula that applies across the board. I think, Sarah, what you offer women, both in the visibility standpoint, but the ability to connect, I would say 90% of our business, if maybe even higher, comes out of referral and connection on both sides. And that I think is amazing testament to the specialists on my team. But also just the fact that that's super important. Community is very important, right? And I always say, as long as you do things with the right intention, success will follow. So I'm not perfect by any means, but I know where my heart is with that. And so if you can be in groups of women and start to connect that way, that's really important. But also figuring out what you can offer them. From a PR perspective, right? Building, like I said, that social media, anyone can say anything, as we know on the internet, right?
Right.
But that might not give you credibility, but you're getting people familiar with who you are. You should still do it with a strategy though, right? So just to put stuff up and add to noise that's not of value isn't necessarily going to get you engagement, followers, or kind of start that engine of where you need to go. So I would really start with your own strategy, even if it's just, consulting and sitting down and saying, okay, let's walk through some of this. Like, what are your goals? Who are you trying to talk to? And make sure that's all wrapped up. From there, and sometimes this is like a 3-month, I always say it's like usually quarterly. The next quarter, we're going to talk about like, okay, how can we get you some more of these earned opportunities? And the key there, and I will say this too, while there might be some opportunity to talk about your business, it's really not. It's about you're the underpinning. What you offer is the underpinning in a bigger story, right? So
yes.
If we have Museum of Illusions as my client, like, yeah, we did the story about their opening and it was awesome. It's the most successful they've ever had. They're launching all over the nation, but to be ongoing, we're looking at things like, how do you keep your brain sharp as you enter into old age? We're segmenting markets and talking to different people and creating stories for our clients where they are then the underpinning. So that's just an important thing to understand, is that people don't just focus on yourself, but like, what can you contribute, and how do you make it relevant outside of just what your business is doing?
You work with a lot of producers and a lot of editors, and tell us about, and you're pitching, maybe you're not, but your team is you're pitching all the time. What are a few tips for my DIY gals who maybe don't have the funds to put up, an agency on retainer? What are a couple of tips for getting their pitch into the box, into the email box?
Yep. So really first start by identifying, well, there's so many, and I see so many PR people that do this wrong too. So again, this could be a whole big thing. It's really about, we do something very unique here where we tailor every outreach that we do, unless it's like a press release, which we very rarely write, unless it's like a grand opening or, a new hire at a Fortune 500 company in the C-suite. We very rarely do those. So it's really about doing your research and then not approaching every single person the same. So if you're smaller, which would be my guess if you're kind of just starting out and don't have the funds for a agency, I would look into like, okay, who is around me that writes about things that I do. And one thing we do, I think, very well, and all the journalists we work with tell us they appreciate, is like, we look at what they're already doing, and then we work backwards to create a story. So it's not about you trying to approach them and say, hey, you should cover me. It's about figuring out what they are looking for and then crafting that story, that pitch around that. And then again, tailoring it, referencing things that they've done before, knowing who their audience is, because they don't care about you, they care about your audience. Right. So
they're not going to bring you on for you to tell the story, your story. They want to use you as a tool, right? As a resource.
Exactly. And like, it's not about, they'll always say like, that's an advertisement, right? And they have to walk that line. So like I started my agency with a national, journalist, who was also a local anchor previously. I've got, specialists on my team that just left a local affiliate station in Charleston. And I very much think that way. So it's important for me that when we have media relations people, that they know how to approach it that way as well. So that's how you build relationships. And that's how, and then being a resource. When I see stuff come up that's crazy in these mom groups, sometimes I'll text and be like, hey, you should look into this. Some of my favorite people that cover that stuff. So nurturing that relationship ongoing and not just reaching out. No one wants to be reached out to when you're asking for something, right? So figure out what you can do for them, what you offer their audience, why it's relevant, and start building your connections that way.
I think that's genius advice. Genius advice. I'm going to call you out because I know you. A long time ago, you did like DIY workshops. Are you going to do those again?
I want to, honestly. It's something that, we're going to start doing that. Well, before COVID, we had like a whole multiple city tour we were going to do, because even with that, we would do kind of the strategy and we would walk, it would be a 2-day workshop. And myself and a journalist, a usually national journalist, we approach it from both sides. So for me, I always say I am the client advocate. I am like, okay, I know that's a great story, media, but I want to make sure it's value for the client. So what are we saying? How are we crafting things in a way that we're working with the media and, doing it in a way that they appreciate, but also that you're getting value out of, especially when we do national and we're flying to New York for press, like let's get value out of that. Right. So teach all of that side of it and really sit down with those core items that you and I just spoke about, with, foundational pieces for strategy. So we walk them through that. And then on the other side, we do that media training. We get them ready because it's, we put them in front of a camera, we watch back, we give advice. And so we did those, and literally we did a couple in Charlotte. They were greatly received. And we were taking them to other cities, and unfortunately COVID happened. So that is something in 2024, I've already talked to my team about and want to start up again. I just want to say I have to wait till there's more time, because there's never more time.
There's never more time.
We have some really big campaigns going on right now, through the end of the year. And then my hope is to focus on those early, Q1 or Q2 of next year.
There was something that you and I, when we had a conversation not too long ago, you mentioned that, like the universe just happens to work out in a beautiful way when you think something is lined up, and then it crushes you and you feel like it's been ripped out from beneath your feet. And then you're like, oh, wait, there's something else. I want to move into like some key, like, let's not just keep it PR. Let's give some life advice here.
Yes, the stuff that
because you're so wise when it
Uh-huh.
comes to these types of things. What do you say? Like, you just recently had this happen. I feel like we all have this happen all the time. We're like chugging along. Everything's really great. It's all lined up to be such a great year. Everything's perfect. And then boom, something happens and you're like, shit.
Yeah.
And then right around the corner, you're like, oh, I know what that was. Something had to get cleared. Like, let's talk a little bit about like just staying in faith, like, how do you do that? How do you not allow your world to turn upside down when things don't go your way?
That's such I spend a lot of time thinking about this, right? Because I think one of the blessings and gifts of business ownership that I never recognize is the self-growth that comes through some of this. So one thing I've started telling myself lately, or asking myself, is like, why is this is happening for me, not to me? And that only has come for me. And not to say I don't still worry about things, but that has only come to me because I have had bad things happen. And then right around the corner, there's something better than I've ever even imagined, right? So like you said, clearing the way. It's happened way too many times to me, like where I've been, I don't say rock bottom in my business, but I'm like, I just hired a bunch of people. And now, as you know, we've got a big lawsuit, and I'll say that, against a client that was, a 7-figure contract. So like that we hired for it. And, but what has been really awesome with that is, a new client that has come in that is something we're passionate about, that also that's quite frankly more fun to work on, and came right in that we wouldn't have had time to take on had this, other client been there. So I don't know, Sarah, if I'm wise per se, but I just recognize that, like, at the end of the day, we only have control over so much, right? PR teaches that me more than anything every day. It's like, we can do our best efforts, and I'm very tenacious and don't ever, like, someone tells me no, and I'm like, I'll just find a different way. But also that, like, yeah, something better always is around the corner, and things will work out the way they're supposed to work out. You only get that in hindsight, right? You really don't. And I am such a visionary person, like you are. You and I both are like, where do we want to go? And we set our sights on, I don't know, like, what's possible, right? We don't take the time sometimes. And I've had my therapist tell me this, to sit and like recognize what you've already accomplished every single day and the things that you've already overcome. And I think when you do that, and I'm a big fan of like gratitude journaling and like expressing my gratitude, I think when you start to do some of those things, it's like, damn, I've not only come far, but like, I need to slow down and recognize, like, I've overcome a lot of things. And the most important thing, it's not the money, it's not, those things will all come, but gosh, I have grown so much as an individual, and I can now have the opportunity and the gift to be able to be vulnerable about the things I've gone through and show others that, like, look, I know, and not to minimize what people's struggles are, but like, I've been there and there's goodness on the other side of that. So, I've just been fortunate to have that experience in the 5 years of business ownership, which is never something I signed up for, right? Like, oh, I'm going to grow so much. But now looking at it, even when the hardest times, I kind of weirdly now get excited, where I'm like, okay, now I know that like this is happening because there's something else on the other side of it. And so I'm in that season right now, and I'm starting to see what those things are, and it's awesome. So I don't say blind faith, but like, you go through it a few times and then you're like, okay, like weirdly, I'm like, I'm going to embrace this. I'm going to learn, but I know that means something else is coming up. That's going to be like way more fabulous than what it is that was put in front of me initially.
I love that. And I love that you said what is for me versus to me. That is such a good mindset perspective shift. It's so important. What do you say to someone who is looking to get into PR? There's so many, so many hot industries. And I feel like PR is always a hot industry. How do you tell a woman that maybe is interested in opening her own agency or like navigating? How does she navigate into this wild industry that you're in?
So it's funny. And I always say this too, whether it was like Sex in the City of my generation, Samantha, or some of like PR shows, people think, I remember like the OC, they worked at like a PR agency or whatever. I'm not the OC, whatever that Laguna Beach show esque was, The Hills, something like that, where people think it's like, oh, we go to parties and, it's red carpet stuff. And that's part of it. But my team can tell you, I can attest to, like, that is not your everyday life, right? So I think you have to get really, really good at, and this is something I think is inherent, but also, you can work on skills of being a good storyteller. Obviously, you're not going to do strategy right off the bat. So when people are like, I'm very strategic, I'm like, great. I'm good with being that. I need a person that knows how to do deliverables, put things together, run things on timelines and all of that. Studying how the media works is very important, and not like, and it's not just, social media, but understanding all of those things. And then I think the biggest thing, and this, you and I have had conversations because it kills me, is there's so many people that they've never worked for anyone else, or maybe they had a year internship and they're like, and now I'm starting my own agency, or now I'm a publicist, or whatever it might be. Girl, it took me 20 years of work to do that. And even then I had imposter syndrome. Like, am I really ready to do this after I've worked on like national brands and done all of that? Right. Like, so I would say be humble enough to learn the craft first and learn it from someone that is good. If you're going to spend your time to do that, absorb everything, take it in, and learn the process. And from there, after a few years, maybe you start to take on, smaller business that can help them locally or things like that. But don't try to, what do they say? Bite the elephant, chew off the elephant. What is it called? Swallow the elephant. I don't know. Something with the elephant. Don't try to take that all at once, because your reputation, you're managing other people's reputation. Yours is important as well, right? So just have realistic expectations, but also know that you can get to any place you want to go. You just kind of have to start and make sure that you're learning that process.
Yes. Oh my gosh. How do people find you? Where do they follow you? You gave us so much knowledge in this like short period of time. So how do they connect with you?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, thank you for having me on here, Sarah. I always just love chatting with you. And I was like, sometimes like going to say inappropriate things, like it's our conversation. I was like, just kidding. I forgot. So you can follow me at Nicole Peternel, Peternel, on all of my social media. Our agency is REIN, REIN Communications with the S at the end. Think about like holding the horse reins. A little bit is a play off of that. .com, also REIN Communications on all of our social. Feel free to reach out to me with questions. I feel very fortunate that even though, you have ups and downs in every career, 25 years later, like I still would not rather be doing anything else. And when I get to talk about PR, like I still love it, which is kind of crazy because I don't think I've loved anything for 25 years. So
that's awesome.
So yeah, you can reach out to me there. And, I look forward to, even if it's just giving some tips, advice, we're starting to share more content out on our own social because we've been so busy with clients, but feel free to reach out with any questions. And I love connecting in particular with women business owners.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here and pouring in. Nicole is an amazing PR queen. Now, that's why I call her that. And seriously, I love this. Thank you for being willing to offer. Ask her questions. She is there. She answers her DMs. She has two great, amazing agencies. Again, Charlotte based, but national for REIN. And she's traveling quite frequently and maybe bringing her workshops back. So
I hope so. I mean, even if it's an excuse to just come see you, I'll do it.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Sarah. I'll catch up with you soon. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the High Achieving Female Podcast, powered by No. where we believe it's time for high-achieving women like you to be seen, heard, and recognized. Until next time, remember, you deserve to be known.